And according to a large data-driven study in 2014, even after 2,000 years, Jesus ranks as the most significant figure in human history.
Tonight, we're going to be going over the quote-unquote historical impact of Jesus Christ. Now, if you're new to the channel here, I don't think that Jesus existed in history, so there's no way for him to have a historical impact as a historical person. There is a way for him to still have a historical impact. That's primarily through just people believing in Jesus, and I think that's what actually happened. But tonight we're going to be reviewing a video where a guy is going to be listing out all the different ways that Jesus has been one of the most historically influential people of our time. He's got a list of things that he's going to go over. If you guys want to fuck around and find out exactly how influential of a person Jesus has been, as defined by the video that we're reviewing, then please stay tuned. What's up, heathens? How ya doing? All right, here's the portion that we all came for. Now, I need to get my notes up because I had to take some slightly extensive notes on this in order to be like fully prepared and shit, because I've got a whole list of stuff to fuck this guy up with. KC, my lovely research assistant, helped me out today with it, so I appreciate you doing that with me there, KC. Yeah, well, at that point, we were working together. We co-did this together. Without further ado, we have a dipshit who thinks that Jesus had a historical impact on society. Like as a historical person, he had an impact on the world. So let's see what he has to say.
Jesus was truly a man without equal, who changed the way we live and think today.
I gotta stop him already. Jesus was a mind without equal. If Jesus was a historical figure, and I'm just gonna go out right now and be like, okay, let's assume that he did exist. If Jesus was a historical figure, he was an itinerant Jew from the Judea region, and he probably thought similar to the other apostles, in a similar fashion, at least, because the apostles ended up teaching what they claim is his message now. It's not that he was all that different. He just had a different view on the Jewish religion than the majority ruling class at the time. Of course, at that time, there were several different groups of Jews around. He really wasn't all that special, like even in the Jewish community. He didn't have a special mind or anything like that. Now, obviously, this guy thinks that the Gospels are historical, and he is going based off of that, which totally different kind of Jesus that I'm talking about, or that anybody that has any kind of historical sense about Jesus would think Jesus did exist in history. Off the bat, he's already pushing a lot of wrong things. I do want to point out how he's got 2 lapel mics, and I have no fucking clue as to why he's got 2. I guess maybe one's a backup just in case. Everything he's saying is doubly important. That's right, honey.
Jesus wrote no book, yet more books have been written about him than any other person in history.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't mean anything about him. I mean, that doesn't make him important. There has been a lot of books written about Jesus, but this is not unexpected. Like, it would be unexpected if we didn't have a lot of books written about Jesus. Now, this is primarily because Christianity has been a major religion in the world for thousands of years. So the fact that there are many books written about him, because for thousands of years we've just assumed that he did exist in history. We assumed that the Gospels were historical in nature. It would actually be rather weird if Jesus didn't have a lot of books written about him. This is what we would expect to see out of a major religion. There's a clear difference between a historical figure having an impact and just the belief arising having an impact and influencing things. So all the evidence that we have only traces back to the belief in Jesus. It doesn't trace back to a historical Jesus. Now, when we're looking for historical impact on things, we're not looking at how many books have been written about this person or anything else. That's not what we're looking for. When we're looking at historical impact, what we're looking at is like for Julius Caesar and his crossing of the Rubicon. There are several historical things that happened after he crossed the Rubicon that couldn't have happened unless he was a real historical figure that actually did that. There are several things that happened after that point that show that it actually happened, and that was the historical impact of that particular event. And then you have historical impacts of other religious, not religious, but historical figures like Alexander the Great. There's a lot of different things that could clue you into it, being the minting of money. There's money with Alexander's face on them, or what we figure is Alexander's face. Just the growth of his empire and everything like that. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about with historical impact, not how many books were written about the motherfucker. This entire list that he's going to be going through, and even this first one about how many books have been written about Jesus, the entire point of all of it is to say that Jesus had a significant historical effect on the past and in our reality that even affect us today. But the problem is that I don't think that he can actually separate between the belief in Jesus and Jesus, the historical figure, if he were to have existed. Be looking out for that in this video as we progress through it. Try to look for anything that kind of discerns between the belief in Jesus and an actual Jesus, if he were to have existed.
Jesus opened no hospital, yet Christians built the first hospitals to show the compassion of Christ.
Wait a second. Christians built the first hospital? Let's see. The first hospital in America was Penn Hospital in Pennsylvania. Let's see the history. And I'm just reading off the Wikipedia here. I feel like Wikipedia should have good enough sources here on this particular topic that we don't have to worry about sourcing. But Wikipedia article for History of Hospitals. The history of hospitals began in antiquity with hospitals in Greece. The earliest general hospital was built in 805 AD in Baghdad by Harun al-Rashid. Already you could see my eye twitching at the first hospitals. But so history of hospitals began in antiquity with hospitals in Greece, the Roman Empire, and the Indian subcontinent as well, starting with precursors in the Asclepian temples in ancient Greece, and then military hospitals in ancient Rome. Greek temples were dedicated to the sick and infirm, but did not look anything like modern hospitals. So, I mean, hospitals go back to ancient Greece. Places where people that were sick would be healed and stuff like that. Of course, him saying that the first hospitals were built by Christians for Christian reasons is obviously bullshit. But to assert that this is because of their faith in Jesus that they opened these hospitals up, I feel like the existence of what they would call pagan hospitals or hospitals by other cultures like Muslim culture or Middle Eastern culture. Apparently, there was a Persian hospital and medical training center in 529. Like I said, hospitals and caring for the sick and everything like that dates way, way back to ancient Greece, way before Christianity was ever a thing. So let's review here. It's obviously bullshit that Christians built the first hospitals. The first hospitals date all the way back to ancient Greece, with more generalized hospitals and care centers being opened up by the Persians as well as Muslims or Middle Eastern, other Middle Eastern nations. And all of this dates way before Christianity. No, those were the Persians and the Muslims. They dated after Christianity. What I meant was that the ones in ancient Greece and apparently ancient Egyptian temples also provided cures and were reminiscent of hospitals. Obviously, Christians were not the first ones. Let's see what other shit he's gonna spout.
Jesus was no scientist. Yet Christians like Galileo Galilei, Johann Kepler, and Sir Isaac Newton, they laid the foundation of modern science to understand the creation of Christ.
Well, I think that they were trying to understand reality, like they were trying to understand our natural world, and they probably did think that God was responsible for the natural world. Just because that's what they thought does not mean that is an impact from Christ. He said that Jesus wasn't a scientist, but all of these scientists established modern science. And they were also Christian. While true that they were Christian, that doesn't mean that Jesus gets all the glory. I feel like all this dates back to, like, with the Bible and how you're supposed to give all the glory to God and all this other stuff. Like, that's God's achievement, not any human's achievement, but God's achievement. I feel like these people were doing things that just naturally came to them. Like Isaac Newton naturally was a scientist. Regardless of what he thought about God and religion, he was a scientist that was studying the natural world. It doesn't matter if he thinks that God is the only reason for the natural world to exist. It doesn't matter if he's Christian. That doesn't mean that Jesus is responsible for that. If Jesus hadn't have come, or the belief rather, remember, we're supposed to be looking for a hardcore link between the historical Jesus and how Jesus has affected reality in order to produce these things. I think regardless of what religion they believed in, they would have developed these scientific principles. Like, they would have developed the scientific method. You know, Galileo, if he wasn't Catholic, he would have been some other religion, and he would have discovered what he did. Namely, I believe the orbits around, or the moons around Saturn, and how we're not in a geocentric universe, we're in a heliocentric universe, solar system, not universe, solar system. If Jesus was the reason for this stuff to happen, then why were Muslims at the forefront of, like, mathematics and science and all that other kind of stuff for the longest time? Like, why were other cultures advancing in the areas of science when they were not Christian? If Jesus actually impacted those things, I would think that Christians would have a bit more of a proclivity of doing science than other nations, but we don't see that. We see other nations also doing these. So I feel like this is more of a commentary on the drive of human nature, the human nature for our curiosity. I feel like it's more indicative of that than it is of anything Jesus did. It's not like Jesus was like, "Thou shalt go out and do science." What is science, sir? You will know later. This is something that will come up later. I just don't think any of that happened.
Jesus was no philosopher, yet Christians like Immanuel Kant, René Descartes, and Sir Francis Bacon influenced the Enlightenment in their quest to know the wisdom of Christ.
Again, regardless of whether or not they were trying to know the wisdom of Christ, I really don't think that Christ had anything to do with them being philosophers. But just in case he's kind of curious, this is the part where I get into the fact that if you're going to cherry pick those guys out and be like, oh, well, these guys right here, they were philosophers and they were trying to know the mind of Christ. Regardless of their goal, you also have to take in all of the shitty people that were also Christian and also philosophers but had really bad ideas. Philosophers like Carl Schmitt and Martin Heidegger, who were Nazis and also Christian. With René Descartes, which I think that's who he actually mentioned, he actually had really disturbing views on non-human animals. He felt that animals, like not non-human animals, couldn't feel pain. And there were rumors that he even did, like, live dissections, where he would just, I guess, dissect an animal of some kind while it was still living, because he thought that they couldn't feel pain. It is pretty horrible. That's right, hun. And I mean, I'll eat a steak or a hamburger, but I still feel like that kind of shit is just too much. That's like that's like psychopathy or a serial killer kind of shit right there. And then we got Immanuel Kant. He was racist, but also David Hume. He was also a racist, but that should be expected for that point in time, because most people were racist at that point in time. But the fact is that if Jesus is reflective of how we view race and other moral aspects now, then you should definitely question this whole Jesus is the reason for these people doing. Because if Jesus was the reason for these people doing these things, then you have to take both the good and the bad with it. Jesus inspired some of the Nazis, but he also inspired these other shitty people, like George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who was a German philosopher who was very racist towards Africans. Nietzsche, he despised sick people, which Nietzsche obviously atheist, but I'm perfectly fine with people being having shitty views because that's their own view. I don't attribute it to some kind of supernatural, absolute moral foundation. I just think that there are some people that are shitty, so I have no problem with Nietzsche being a shitty person or having a shitty view or two. Mill condoned colonialism. Fanon was homophobic, and Friedrich, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce his name, but he was anti-Semitic. So, I mean, I feel like this goes to show how it doesn't matter what you believe as far as Jesus goes. And Jesus, as far as Jesus being the primary influencer for these people, this is a non sequitur type of argument, because it doesn't follow that Jesus inspired these people but not these people, and regardless of why the cherry picked ones that he pointed out, regardless of why they were in their particular field, that doesn't mean that Jesus is the reason for it. You could swap out the belief in Jesus with anything else. These are not things that we would consider to be historically impactful for Jesus living in the 30s. We're looking for things that couldn't have happened without Jesus as far as historical impact goes. But for these guys, regardless of what they believed, they were still going to enter into this field and probably have these ideas. So it really doesn't matter what belief in the supernatural or in God that they have.
Jesus opened no school, yet world-leading universities like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and even Oxford were founded by Christian clergymen to advance the knowledge of Christ.
Oh, I'm so glad that you brought up schools there, dickhead. How about we talk about Archbishop Archbishop Coe High School. That's a school. It's not a college, obviously. It's a high school. It's an all-girl high school, in fact. And also, this was the high school featured in the Netflix documentary, The Keepers. If you're not aware of that particular documentary, you should definitely go in there and watch it. It's episodic, so it's going to take you a little while to watch it, but it's a really good documentary, and it shows how this particular school helped hide a sexual predator and how this predator preyed on the girls that were going to that school. And in fact, one Sister Kathy Sesnick tried to blow the whistle on this particular predator priest, but she mysteriously was murdered, and nobody has been arrested for her murder. To get the full effect, you need to go and you need to watch it. It's very hard to watch because they go into painstaking detail about how this school and the Catholic Church in general was hiding a pedophile in their midst and allowing them to continuously and repeatedly sexually abuse and rape girls that went to that school. There was also this school in California that was featured in the Mea Maxima Culpa. It's a HBO documentary, and it's about the very first group of guys. They were boys when they were assaulted, but a group of guys that first stood up against the Catholic Church because of the abuse that they suffered. So it was St. John's School for the Deaf. This school for the deaf helped hide a pedophile priest working at the school that violated hundreds of boys over several years. So if you're going to take credit for those universities, and Christians were the ones that set them up, then you also have to take credit for these places, because these places help do a lot of damage, emotional damage, psychological damage, physical damage to people. So if Jesus influenced those guys to set up those universities, Jesus also influenced the priests that violated young children. You can't just cherry pick one or the other. You have to take both. I admit that Christians set up a number of different schools, but that's because they have this, they have the means and they have the opportunity and they have the institutional infrastructure to provide those things. The church, Catholic Church and the Protestant churches, they have this access to funds and infrastructure that many other organizations simply don't have access to. So it's just easier for them to set these places up. Regardless of what end goal they were working towards, though, that doesn't mean that those places are like a check mark or like some kind of like tick on the board for Christians. Like, oh, Jesus did this, Jesus did that. Jesus didn't do shit. Just the belief in Jesus is what they had. Even so, I feel like those people would have set up those institutions regardless of what belief they had. Schools and hospitals already existed. Hell, I'm fairly certain that there were Muslim schools set up, like in the Middle East. I'm fairly certain that there were, there were Jewish schools. There were pagan schools that were set up. Paul, the Paul from the Bible, he learned Greek from a pagan school. That's where he would have had to have learned Greek from. There weren't Muslim schools before Christianity. That's not what I meant. I just meant other cultures build schools as well. It doesn't matter what belief you have. I mean, I think that those schools would have popped up anyways.
Jesus led no human rights movement, yet Christian politicians like Abraham Lincoln, William Wilberforce, pioneered the abolition of slavery because every person was valued by Christ.
I mean, that's not why the abolition movement came around at all. People on both sides of the Civil War and the abolition movement used the Bible and their belief in Christ. Some people thought that the Bible suggested that, people should be enslaved. Other people disagreed with what the Bible says, and they made up their own interpretations of it. And so you have people using the same source material in different ways in order to push their own particular agendas. So what that seems to indicate to me is that not only can the Bible and Jesus in general be used in order to push both sides, but regardless of the fact that they both believed in Jesus, one was abolitionist, one was not. One wanted to own people, one thought that was horrendous. And it doesn't matter if they have a belief in Jesus or not. It just matters that they as people held those positions. So it was not an effect of the religion. It was an effect of them. That's how they saw their religion. There was something in them, like the abolitionists. There was something in the abolitionists that couldn't square up owning another person as property. But there was something in the other side, the slave owners, there was something in them where they didn't have a problem with owning another person as property. So it really doesn't matter what they believed in. It just matters that they thought the way that they did. I really don't think that any Christian apologist needs to start talking about how Jesus supports the abolition movement or that Jesus is responsible for the ending of slavery, or Christianity is responsible for the ending of slavery, because, Christianity was pretty much at the forefront of slavery for a long time. The slave trade was done by Christians, so you either have to admit that Christians also enslaved people along with the other Christians that wanted it to end. You can't cherry pick. And that seems to be all he's doing in this video, is cherry picking which portions of history he wants to attribute to Jesus.
And finally, Jesus opened no orphanage, yet Christian philanthropists like George Muller and Thomas Bernardo opened children's homes in the name of Christ.
Okay, so what? Again, when we're looking for historical impact, we're looking for things that couldn't have happened without Jesus being a real figure. All we have is just the belief that Jesus was the Messiah and that he absolved sins and all this other stuff. That's all that they had, was the belief. Everybody has beliefs, one belief or another belief. It doesn't matter, okay? Because if you attribute the founding of those orphanages to Jesus, and I haven't researched those particular orphanages that those guys set up, but you also have to take in the same hand these orphanages, the ones that I'm about to list. But just give you a little bit of history on orphanages. The Romans first opened orphanages around 400 AD. The Jewish law, the religion that came before Christianity, prescribed the care for widow and orphans. Athenian law supported all orphans of those killed in military service until the age of 13. Plato had this to say about orphans. Orphans should be placed under the care of public guardians. Men should have a fear of the loneliness of orphans and of the souls of their departed parents. A man should love the unfortunate orphan of whom he is guardian as if he were his own child. He should be as careful and as diligent in the management of the orphan's property as of his own, and even more careful still. So this sentiment about taking care of orphans has been around for a long time. It doesn't matter whether or not those guys believed in Jesus or were Christian in general. That doesn't mean that those guys wouldn't have set up orphanages if Jesus hadn't have existed or Christianity hadn't existed. I feel like regardless of whatever belief they had, they would have still set up those orphanages. But like I said before, you have to also take in these orphanages as effects of Jesus, of like the historical impact of Jesus. In Poland, we have the Sisters of Mercy of St. Boremo, and they had their own orphanage set up, and they terrorized children with various punishments, beatings, humiliation, and ill treatment. The Halifax Protestant Orphans Home was plagued by allegations from former residents that included physical abuse, such as beatings with sticks and straps, children tied to beds at night or locked in closets, and emotional cruelty as well. And then you have the Bethany Home. You have the unmarked graves of 40 children from a Protestant residential institution that had been discovered in the Dublin cemetery. A person that is familiar with this says that the abuse and neglect of the Protestant orphans was just as brutal and widespread as the maltreatment of children in Catholic-run orphanages and industrial schools. So this was well known that they did this. Now, another thing that I didn't have written down in my notes, but has happened recently, is the 3 Catholic run schools, the residential schools up in Canada, where they systematically committed a genocide on indigenous people. In the article that I saw, they only mentioned 3, so maybe there's more. I just saw that there were three institutions that were run by Catholics where they ripped children out of their homes, sent them to these residential schools, and proceeded to basically systematically kill them. And there have been hundreds of remains found near these institutions, these residential schools. So you have to take the bad with the good. That's fine if you want to claim those 2 guys, but I feel like you're going to find way more bad shit in this particular area than you will find good shit. The 2 guys that he mentioned, let's assume that they ran good orphanages and they weren't shitty to people. These are sprinkles on the top of a shit-flavored ice cream cone, okay? That's all that is just little sprinkles on top of it. You can't mask the taste of shit, all right? There's shit underneath it, and these 2 guys are not going to sweeten it up.
This list could go on and include many others whose lives have been influenced because of Jesus.
Not because of Jesus, because of their belief in Jesus and whatever their pastor, priest, whoever is teaching them about the faith. Also, their own particular thoughts about their faith are influencing them. So it's not Jesus, like the historical figure of Jesus, influencing these things. It's just the mere belief in Jesus that does it.
Although Jesus' earthly ministry spanned a mere 3.5 years, his legacy continues to reverberate across the world. Even today, the Bible is still the best-selling book of all time, with over 5 billion copies sold.
This is not all that surprising, primarily because Christianity being one of the most popular religions in all history, you would expect to have a lot of Bibles. And a lot of Bibles have been sold because Christianity's been around for so long and has been the most popular religion for thousands of years. Well, just over 1,000 years, rather.
And according to a large data-driven study in 2014,
citation fucking needed. I don't know what in the fuck he's about to say, but if you're gonna bring out an ambiguous study that was done in 2014, I feel like you need to correctly cite it on screen. When I've done a similar thing, like whenever I've addressed whether or not Jesus existed in history, let's say I'm talking about Josephus, and I reference Paul Hopper's work on the Testimonium Flavianum, I cite that particular work and I show you where that you can find it. When I talk about Alice Wheatley, I cite her paper. I show you where you can find it. Cite the paper that you're talking about. Cite the study that you're talking about. Fucking citation needed, motherfucker.
Even after 2,000 years, Jesus ranks as the most significant figure in human history.
The most significant figure in human history? Let's assume that Jesus did exist in history for a second. It would just be the belief in Jesus that seems to be significant in history. Not that it had a significant impact, but just that it has a significant presence. Because I can't doubt that the belief in Jesus has a significant presence in history. But I don't think that it's the primary driver of everything that he's listed here. I don't think that Jesus is the primary driver of the abolitionist movement. I don't think that Jesus is the primary driver of orphanages. I don't think that Jesus is the primary driver of hospitals. I mean, hell, Jesus said that his apostles should be able to go out and heal people. That's not, they should be able to go out and take people to a hospital so they can get real help. That's, hey, you could go out there, slap a motherfucker, and they'll be healed. That's what that means. It doesn't mean actually take care of them medically. It means magically heal them.
So what can be said about such a historic figure? During an interview, Albert Einstein commented, "I am a Jew, but I am enthralled by the luminous figure of the Nazarene." When asked if he accepted the historical existence of Jesus, Einstein replied, "Unquestionably, no one can read the Gospels without feeling the actual presence of Jesus."
This particular quote, I mean, I'm not sure when it was made, but before Einstein died, he wouldn't have had access to the kind of information that we have about the Gospels now, because the information that we have about the Gospels now is that the Gospels are not historical. The Gospels are fictional. They are mythical. And I get that the Gospels seem to really resonate with some people, but that does not make them necessarily real. And I feel like at the time, all of the scholarly work done in Albert Einstein's time, all the scholarly work done around the Gospels were showing that, the Gospels were historical. So, I mean, I could totally understand people at the time of Einstein thinking this, but just because Einstein said it doesn't make it true. I feel like he's bringing up Einstein in a somewhat argument from false authority type situation, because Einstein's not a historian, he's a scientist. You can't exactly expect a scientist to have the kind of expertise in the field of history as he does in the field of science. But I feel like he's mentioning Einstein here in order to give him some kind of authority on this particular matter. And I really don't care what Einstein thinks about Jesus.
His personality pulsates in every word. He said, "No myth is filled with such a life." The historical impact of Jesus demands a verdict. Surely no myth can make such a colossal impact. No quip can dispose of his legacy.
There are plenty of things that have been mythical in the past that have made significant impacts on societies and the human population in general. I mean, the Greek pantheon of gods, as well as other pagan gods, had existed for a long time and had similar significant effects on their respective societies. I don't think that attributing all of these effects to Jesus makes them any more real, because it sounds like what he's saying here is that, all of these things happened because of Jesus. There's no way that Jesus was a myth, because if he was, these things wouldn't have happened. That's true, honey. Myths can be incredibly influential on people. People believe in mythical shit all the time. There's, the Mothman is mythical. People have often attributed certain things happening to the Mothman. There's an entire movie about it, and it's based on quote unquote eyewitness testimony. But the Mothman isn't real, just like the Jersey Devil's not real, or any of the Ohio Frogman person. People believe in the myth that Christopher Columbus founded America when he really didn't, or that Christopher Columbus was some kind of great person. Little do you know that, he enslaved indigenous people, and he was actually brought back in handcuffs at one point for enslaving indigenous people and being horrible to them. And so he was a really shitty person, but people want to think that he was a great person, all because he accidentally sailed to a new continent. There's that kind of myth. There's several other myths, that were taught in schools, like the myth that Moses is the first American. Myths can have a profound effect on society. So to say that, oh, this guy had too much of an effect to be a myth, that's just not correct. Myths can profoundly affect things. All it takes, and that's the entire point of this video, all it takes is a belief in something for it to have an effect. People believe something to be true, and that in turn affects their behavior. So it's just the mere belief in Jesus that may or may not have done the things that he's listed in this video. I think that because it's just a mere belief, if you traded that belief out with a different belief, they would have still done the things that they did. They would have just attributed it to this new belief that they have. It literally doesn't matter what they believe. It matters what they did as people, because that's the kind of people that they were.
No matter how artful, his impact alone testifies of who he claimed to be: Son of the Divine, Son of God.
So to round out tonight, his argument is that the belief in Jesus did all of these things or is directly responsible for these things. A lot of those things are just plain wrong, that they were the firsts, like setting up the first schools. You know, that's just completely wrong, because schools have been around for longer than Christianity's been a thing. He attributes the belief in Jesus to those things being set up or those things being done. Regardless of why they did them, it's just the pure fact that they did them, because they are responsible for their actions. If you are wanting to claim those for Christianity, saying, oh, Christianity is the only reason why they did that, you have to also take the shitty things that Christians have done, and you have to say that they did those things because of Christ. Christ compelled those Catholic people to grape all those children. Christ compelled all those people to physically and emotionally abuse children. Christ compelled the Nazis to commit genocide on the Jews. I don't think that Christ compelled them to do it. But if you're going to take these wins, if you will, cherry pick the wins from history and attribute them to Christ, then you also have to attribute the shitty things to Christ too. You have to take it with both hands, the good and the bad. But this guy just wanted to put out this video where he only takes it with one hand, the good hand, the hand that has all the good shit in it that he wants to attribute to Christ. And he just wants to ignore the fact that shitty things have been done directly in the name of Christ. And those things probably wouldn't have been done without Christ. They may have still done them, but it would have just been a different belief, which seems to speak to the fact that there are just sometimes shitty people. Shitty people exist. Shitty people will do shitty things. Good people will do good things. I really hate it when apologists out there try to act like the effects of Christianity have only ever been good, because that's just not true at all. All in all, I felt his video was not good. I hope that you heathens have a lovely weekend, and I guess I will see you guys on Monday. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens!